Hi, this is Jordan from Edu-Take. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a live reaction of the Vice debate where parents, teachers, and students debate the education system. So for those who don't know, I have over 10 years of experience in the education sector, currently in the nonprofit space, worked with many different education stakeholders, and I also have my master's degree in education policy and management. But before we get into the video, I need you guys to do me a solid. Hit like, subscribe, and make sure you click on that notification bell so that you guys won't miss another update like this. And without further ado, let's get into the video.
What's the purpose of education?
I think the purpose of education is twofold. One, to help build and support the individual, but also help build and support society as a whole.
I think the purpose of education is to educate and not indoctrinate. And I think that in a lot of ways we've strayed from that in the original purpose of what it's supposed to be.
I think it should be intelligence and character. I think you should be able to understand the world around you and understand who you are and your purpose and try to make the world a better place with it.
And just to go off that, the idea that education, you have to balance the importance of memorizing the quadratic formula while simultaneously addressing social and political issues respectively.
I think that the purpose of education is to understand the world that you exist in and use that understanding as a means for creating change or even understanding yourself on a deeper level.
The purpose of education is to prepare children for the real life and also make sure that they are literate.
I like how the moderator started off just asking a basic question of why they're all here, which is like, what is the purpose of education? Doing that ensures that everybody has a common framework to start from. You get to hear different opinions on like what they value in education. I can already tell off jump because CJ came in hot, and I'm assuming that he is conservative because once he said education, not indoctrination, he sounds like conservative pundit. I was never a fan of people who used the term in the definition, but I digress. To answer her question, similar to what other people were saying, I think the purpose of education is to provide our students with the skills, the tools, and the knowledge to not only be successful academically, but in life. Now in this education landscape, there's a lot of talk about test scores. And I can't speak for every school district and every student, but I think when we start prioritizing the whole child and their needs and what they need outside of the classroom, so that way when they come into the classroom, they're healthy, they're functioning, they're ready to learn. I think once we grasp that, we will go far with our students.
When we talk about who's doing the educating, who should decide what's being taught?
Parents. I think that parents should have a huge say in what's going on in the classroom because it's their kids, not ours. As a public school teacher 15 years, I was always aware that these are not my children. We have to make sure that we're respecting parents and their beliefs and their values.
I would push back though and say that there does need to be collaboration, right? I completely respect your idea of it is not our job as educators to put forth a belief in front of children, right? That includes not perpetuating parents' beliefs in the classroom as well. In my opinion, that would be keeping a non-biased viewpoint, simply presenting issues, and then allowing kids to decide for themselves.
I would agree that I think it needs to be a collaborative effort. The way that we decide curriculum in Texas is that work groups comprised of community members, educators, parents, even in some cases students and public service officials come together to draft curriculum plans, and then it's ultimately decided on by our State Board of Education, which has a lot of kind of assistance from parents as well. So I think that kind of format can be really effective because it also empowers students to become involved in the fate of their education. And as a student myself, I think that that's incredibly important because our perspectives need to be heard as well.
To say that parents should be the sole contributor of what is being taught in the classrooms is unfair and unrealistic, especially if you have a child that's not homeschooled. Essentially, we know that it's government officials, school board leaders, curriculum developers, school administrations, like people who are up at the top that make these educational policies. To like negate those individuals as well as like teachers and students is not beneficial for a student's overall educational experience. I agree that it needs to be a collaborative effort because I think having diverse perspectives in a child's life can enhance and improve a child's overall academic and social experience. I also wanted to shout out Zoha. So often we tend to discredit Gen Z and also younger generations, saying like, oh, they're entitled, they don't know better. But I think she's like a perfect example of someone who's articulate, but also it shows if we give high school students or just students in general the opportunity to include their voices on what's going on in their education. She's like the perfect example of when given the opportunity, students will rise to the occasion.
I'm okay with public school, but the problem with it is that it's become an environment where it's almost like the school to prison pipeline. We used to talk about that in the 90s. We're not talking about that anymore. And I think that's something that parents need to wake up about and America needs to wake up about, the institutionalization of our children.
I talk about the school to prison pipeline
Yeah.
all day, every day. And I hear what you're saying, that it's terrible that there are parents who are sending their kids to schools that are not safe. However, what about the parents that don't have a choice? Like, I'm thinking about like the most marginalized community when I said public schools here, because I agree with you, the public schools have a lot of work to do to become the safe places where our kids are not in institutions where they're ignored or not giving the services they need. And also, for the people that don't have a choice and that is the only option their kids have, I just believe that's worth fighting for. That's why I said public
Absolutely.
schools.
I'm a big advocate for school choice.
Well, why don't we just show of hands? Who believes in school choice?
Can you specify like what do you mean by
So
that?
that's where parents can apply the money that they pay to taxes. They get vouchers and they can put that into any school that they want. It's very popular in red states right now, and a lot of blue states are against it, especially teachers' unions are against it because it's taking money away from the public schools and creating more of a competitive market.
While I am pro public education, I don't know, maybe I'm straddling the fence, but I think to choose one would be unfair because I think we're not taking into account the specific learning needs of your child. And I think so oftentimes, like, there's just a huge debate of like private schools versus charter schools, and they're taking money away and all this other stuff. Ultimately, it depends on the specific learning needs of your child. To that point, I also agree with one of the panelists when they said, what about the students that don't have a choice? And I think those students, all students, are worth fighting for on that regard. And we know in urban school districts that consist of Black and brown youth face significant academic challenges compared to white students. That's a fact. Like, there is an educational gap, and not just even in urban schools too, but also in rural schools. We know a lot of these schools that need the most support, they're often overcrowded, underfunded, and like that panelist said, as Kim said, they deserve to have a quality education, right? And then I was reading some studies just a couple of weeks ago that when it comes to student achievement, it is teachers that are the number one most important factor when it comes to that. So we really need to not just only prioritize student mental health, but we need to prioritize teacher mental health and figure out some concrete solutions to make them feel valued and make sure that they stay in the profession. Because especially after COVID, like, you see the national teacher shortage and teachers leaving left and right, whether you read it in a news article, a TikTok, a YouTube channel. I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
We have this mistrust of parents that they can't educate their own children, and I think that that's wrong. I think that a lot of parents, and if you look at homeschool data, like my friend Phil right here, he's got 7 kids and he's homeschooling them all. And actually homeschool kids are turning out really well.
I think you bring up a lot of very valid points, but I have to say, and I just want your opinion on this, I would never homeschool my own kids. And I want my kids to be smarter than me, than I ever was. How am I going to have a child that is smarter and does better than I do if I'm their only teacher?
You grow alongside your child.
Okay.
I think as a teacher, I feel like I've learned the most in my life as a teacher, like more so than in college. And, so parents becoming teachers is actually good for them as well.
Okay.
And even in the public schools, a lot of teachers are relying on the lesson plans. But speaking from experience, I got to give the credit where it's due. My wife does the homeschooling, and I've watched that process of her learning alongside, to make sure when they ask these questions, I'm getting knowledge on the material as well so I can help you get through it. Nothing replaces that value, that bonding time that she gets to have with the kids.
Speaking of homeschool data, I read on NBC News that just an increasing percentage post-COVID of Black families removing their kids from private school, traditional public school into homeschool for some of the reasons that she listed, but then also too like racial discrimination, like those educational gaps that they felt like were lacking, and then just the overall school violence and school shootings that we've seen nationally. So I think that's an interesting point.
I think it should be health education, yes. I taught middle school and high school, and they started giving it to my students in 7th grade, and I have students come back to me traumatized because I think sex ed has gone away from what it was. There are some lessons, like for example, they have a lesson where the kids in 3rd grade in the New Jersey curriculum, there's a picture of a woman's spread eagle, and they're learning all the different body parts of the clitoris and the stuff. Every child is different. Some are not developmentally ready for this or mature enough for it.
I grew up with abstinence education.
That's pretty rough.
Where we didn't talk about sex ed until middle school, but mostly 10th grade and high school. But I think that middle school is far too late to be talking about sex ed. And it's not because I think that 2nd graders are, you know, wanting to be promiscuous, but like having sex ed scaffolded because it is a preventative measure against sexual assault, often being done in the home.
Just because that happens in the home doesn't mean that we need to label all parents as not capable of teaching sex to their children and giving it to teachers.
But teachers, for a lot of children, are the only trusted adults, and it is incredibly dangerous to remove teachers who are trained professionals to deal with these crises in the home from the situation, and that's just like a funnel for child abuse.
I also agree that sex education needs to be scaffolded. And when got the lady's name was talking about like, you know, my kids were traumatized, I think that's where developmental psychology comes into hand because, okay, maybe those students were traumatized, but I think scaffolding it in a way that appropriately fits what students are experiencing during that form of childhood and adolescence, I think will mitigate the traumatization, if that makes sense. For example, if I had a student that was in early childhood, so pre-K, kindergarten, you name it, I'm not going to show them a woman's spread eagle. But what do you learn at that age? You learn sharing is caring. You know about your personal space and respecting other people's personal space. You learn about healthy boundaries. And kids love to also say no. So how do we ensure that we teach our students how to say no at that age when they're experiencing something that they're not comfortable with? When it comes to the elementary school level, I do think that sex education should have like basic anatomy, like what does this mean? And this is its function. It's important because at middle school, let's keep it honest. If you are an educator right now, let me know. The middle schoolers are talking about sex and they're definitely having sex. So I think waiting till middle school, like I agree with the other lady, is too late. Aside from like the technical know-hows, I do think there should be a heavy emphasis of respecting your body and in terms of like respecting your space and what does healthy relationships look like to you and what does healthy relationships look like to other people and respecting that. We know in high school students are mastering like their sense of self and who they want to be in the world. I would love to see a pro sex ed health curriculum that also not just talks about the how to and the know-how, but also like what do healthy relationships look like to you, whether they're platonic or romantic?
Critical race theory in reality is this complex legal institution that relates race to all of the institutions of America since its founding and since its birth. And it's something that I've never learned about in my classroom. I don't have any friends that have learned about it in their classrooms. It's something that's often taught on the graduate level or the undergraduate level.
I saw the lessons that contain critical race theory in California.
It said the words critical
Yes,
race.
it said the words
Which
critical
is,
race theory.
And
Yes.
she's not wrong. She's not wrong because some states have implemented CRT into their curriculum. It means different things for different districts. So this is about to be a very complicated conversation.
So in my district, and this is in California, they're requiring a class called ethnic studies in order to graduate. And in the class, they were taught about critical race theory. They were taught the definition. They were taught to analyze school policy through critical race theory, and they were taught how critical race theory is beneficial to analyze the US. It's basically like this idea that every institution in America, every institution, that interaction that you have has some sort of element of race, and usually there's a hierarchy of oppressed versus oppressor. And there are kids in America in K through 12 that are being taught that, and I'm so tired of people saying that's not happening when it is. And then when I expose it, being called racial slurs and names for exposing it, and I'm like, come on, guys. Like, so I think we need to stop saying it's not being taught in America and change it to, should it be taught in America? Because it is. It is. There are teachers that are teaching this.
I'm going to be honest with you guys. When I hear people, especially people who are on the right, talk about critical race theory, I think they often confuse it with culturally relevant teaching. Similar in that they address diversity and education and equity in education, but totally different when it comes to their approaches. CRT seeks to deconstruct and analyze the systems and structures around us and how they perpetuate inequality. I think when people are talking about CRT, they confuse it with culturally relevant teaching. I consider that to be like a learning framework in which teachers come to celebrate differences any size in the classroom to just promote a healthy environment, right? That means affirming students' identities, affirming students' racial background, their linguistic background, whatever it is, to make sure that students are celebrated and respected in the classroom. And you've heard it before too from certain conservative pundits who talk about education and not indoctrination and how it lacks educational value. I might do a video on that, but when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, are we really looking at the research? There's been a heap of studies done over the last decade of how courses like ethnic studies, multicultural studies, African American studies not only help students affirm their identities and know their place in the world, but also can contribute to significant academic performance as well. There was a study done, I believe, in California. They observed a ninth grade ethnic studies class, and then at the end of the class, students boosted their GPA, their student attendance. It was helping students see themselves and affirm their identities, because oftentimes it is marginalized students that are not seen and represented in those classrooms. Having those courses are really important, and I don't just fall into the notion that it is our marginalized students that should take these courses. I believe white students should take these courses as well.
It's not often called CRT anymore. It's called diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's called all of these different names and labels because of how divisive of a thing that it is. And I think at the end of the day, the big thing here is that let's teach Black history. No one on the right is saying, do not teach Black history, do not teach slavery. If we forget those lessons of the past, we're bound to repeat them. But what we're also saying is that stop being vindictive towards white people for being white. No one alive today was a slave, and no one alive today owned slaves. And so for white children to sit in a classroom and be blamed for sins that they themselves did not commit is wrong. For Black people, for Black children to sit in a classroom and be told that because of the color of your skin, well, it doesn't matter how hard you try, you're really not going to go that far because the society hates you, and then you have all of these structural barriers preventing your success. That is also wrong. That is not lessons of hope. That is not lessons of opportunity, and I think that is what schools should be about. You can't create the next generation of leaders if they are never capable of seeing themselves as leaders.
Using the definition that a lot of people talked about, the purpose of education, we do our students a disservice in their education when we use fear-mongering language and also promote and endorse government officials that seek to maintain the status quo. And one way that they maintain the status quo is making sure that they marginalize students of color. And you see it around the nation when it comes to banning of LGBTQ, making sure that diversity and equity inclusion are not allowed in schools. Teachers are getting fined, African American studies curriculums being banned, books being banned that promote difference. I think those are the ways that we perpetuate inequality. It really grinds my ears.
How should we be teaching race?
Well, I don't think we should be teaching white privilege in the classroom.
But teaching about race, if you're, designing your ideal, setting.
Yeah. I think
how do you think race should be
Is
taught?
that because you think it doesn't exist, or because they can't handle it, or
I think again, when it comes to the privilege discussion, that's a great conversation for you to have with your child. But I don't think that taxpayer-funded hatred should be something that we allow in our schools.
Okay, bro, real talk though, brother to brother. Teaching white privilege does not inherently mean Black people are less. Factually incorrect, right?
Out of all the people that spoke in the panel, you can already tell that I probably disagree with CJ the most. I am glad when people like Desmond are able to call out things when they see it and just say, hey, you're wrong. But as CJ was speaking, I was thinking, like, why is it, and particularly when it comes to educators, why is it so hard for us to talk about race? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I think there's like a host of reasons, right? Having conversations about race is uncomfortable, whether you're a white person or you're someone of a marginalized identity. And when it comes to conflict resolution and when it comes to talking about personal issues that affect you, it's uncomfortable and it calls for skills that a lot of us don't always have, right? We need the skills and the language to develop those uncomfortable conversations. And oftentimes when I see talks like this, especially when it comes to folks on the right, there's this avoidance of we must not talk about it because our white students are going to feel like they're the devil and they're bad. It often comes down to just like a fear of misspeaking, a fear of adding to the confusion and the polarization that we're already experiencing in this country. I don't care who you are, whether you're a white person, you're on the right, you're on the left, nobody feels good to hear that they have intentionally caused somebody harm. But just because those conversations are hard and uncomfortable doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. I think teachers and parents, if they've given adequate training and support to have these conversations, I think will equip students to have conversations with students and people just in general across the aisle. And we can empower them to have conversations with people that they don't agree with. Overall, I think this was a really good discussion with various viewpoints. I think compared to other vice debates that I've seen, it's much more respectful, much more nuanced. But I think that's often what we do as educators, right? We can have a civilized conversation even if we don't agree. So shout out to all of them. And even though like it did get heated at times, I did appreciate everybody's perspectives, even folks that I didn't really agree with. I really hope they do a part two. It's a 45-minute discussion, but there were so many things that I felt like they should have covered on. So Vice, if you ever see this, have me on your panel or talk about these topics in part two. I would have loved to hear just more debates on this national teacher shortage, school violence, especially when it comes to like school shootings and violence against teachers, age-old conversations about standardized testing and teachers unions, but then also college affordability and like the implications that has on teachers, because you see a lot of states and districts incentivizing teachers to stay in the classroom by, hey, we'll knock off your student loans. I think those would be some interesting topics to hit. Let me know what you think should have been covered in this discussion, or if they do a part two, what could be discussed. I'm also just really looking forward to hearing your overall opinions. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.